The first one is, how important is membership in this group to you?
Most groups measure their success through the numbers of people that they're able to attract. So the more they attract, the more they believe that their message is validated. And validation is extremely important. With our organization, unlike some of the others that may have a baker's group or a fisherman's group, you know, their ideas, the task at hand, fishing and improving techniques. Ours is more based on principles and values that we believe are eternal. So it's even more important that membership grows, because even on a subconscious level, that validates those what we believe are timeless principles and values. So it validates it, and it also makes it seem that there is hope for the future as the numbers grow, because we really focus on addressing those principles and values, and then going out and trying to present those principles and values to our elected representatives and remind them of our American heritage.
So, speaking of your principles, values, and heritage, how would you, is it possible to define the culture of the Tea Party?
I believe that the culture is embedded in the principles and values that began in the country. So the country was basically Christian Judeo in principle and in values, and arising from what they learned from the Bible and from philosophers of the day, European philosophers. They were able to cobble together the idea of freedoms and liberties. And they struggled with it because all they knew was that there was an oppression that was going on. It was faith-based. A lot of the people who were in this country left because of religious persecution, but they were all English. And part of their faith said that to be a good Christian, you must honor the representative of your ruler, which is the king. So not only are you going against the king, but you're also going against a component of your faith. So they had a struggle with that, and what they came up with was that there were eternal principles that went beyond temporal powers, individual men, and that individual men or groups could not come up with a series of laws and rules that would shortchange or corrupt eternal principles, that there are eternal principles and rights and freedoms that superseded that. Right. And so those are where those rights and freedoms came from. And because of that, a king or government or a group of people could never change, could never take a right away from you. And so this is something that was given to us from our Creator, nature's God. And because of that, we are not only duty-bound, but we're obligated to fight for that. And so that's how they reconcile that. So those principles and values that they embraced then, the Tea Party of 2015 embraces.
It would be eternal. So what's a source of pride and a positive dimension about the group, about the Tea Party?
Well, I would say that before 2009, it's been going on for 6 years. Yeah. I was, and most of us were Americans, we were responsible people, that we followed the law, paid our taxes. But the difficulty in the last 6 years that we have faced when we came forward and petitioned our governments and on our grievances made us better Americans, made us understand why we are, where we come from, the heritage that we have inherited, what they did in the past and what they put at risk on the table over 200 years ago, and how we find ourselves in the difficulty we find ourselves today, and questioning whether or not we can make those same sacrifices. So for many of us, it's not just a solitary decision, it also impacts on the people we love the best or the most, our family members and our friends, because we have to leave. Sometimes we have to leave for long periods of time, going to city council meetings, going to trips to DC, and it takes money to do that also. So we have to make a decision, a conscious decision. And that conscious decision, how we make that decision, is going over what our heritage means and going over why the purpose of why we do what we do and what animates us. And then when we weigh those things, if we continue to fight the good fight, it makes us better Americans.
From that, I can see how being a Tea Party member would influence your life, and like how like you just said, you literally take trips to DC, and, which is not a small thing to do, to put your life on hold to follow this very important task. Is there a less desirable or negative dimension in your group, or of the culture, of the Tea Party?
Well, say that question again.
It's basically the reverse of the last question. Is there a less desirable or negative dimension of the group's culture?
Well, it's not really an isolation and vacuum. It's a pushback. And the forces that would oppose our principles and values are very, very powerful. And so they are able to leverage their influence into what has been called the politics of personal destruction. They're able to construct an image that's negative and try to implant it on this grassroots movement. And to the degree that they're successful, it impacts on us. Because of the opposite flow, once we get this sense of rejection from I guess a powerful aspect of society, then it does impact on us, because it's a rejection of those principles and values that we hold eternal. And in so much as that voice that speaks of American values and heritage dims, it is a sign that that voice and those words may no longer be heard. And so it puts us on edge sometimes.
Right.
And it creates a sense of urgency. So that is a kind of a negative impact, and it has a lot to do with how we view things and what kinds of things can demoralize that kind of group. And that's one thing that can demoralize us.
Oh, it seems like that's highly influenced by just how Tea Party is treated and seen by the outside. Do you see yourself as a dominant group in terms of what you would consider a dominant group? Like some people would consider like conservative white Republican males under the Bush administration a dominant group. How would you place the Tea Party?
We're not really a dominant group in that sense, because we're not a monolithic block. There's monolithic blocks. A lot of people see the Democrat Party as a monolithic block, that no matter what concerns they might have as who's running for president, or what kind of suspicions they have about their character, if they select that person, the majority selects that person, then all those questions get silenced, and they just really become one block of united opinion, of positive opinion about that person. Our group's not like that. We discern, and since our discernment comes from a place of principle and values, then individually we may have a conflict. Now the key is that as long as we all basically have and share that pool of principles and values, that the conflict won't become something that will create a rift.
It seems like you're using it in a way that it's actually a positive. Any sort of disagreement. And
it should be. And as long as we hold on to those principles and values, then the conflict, the disagreements, can actually emerge into a way of learning the other person's position and maybe changing. As long as you don't feel like you're being forced out of your principles and values. But if you do believe that, then the conflict can become serious. So as far as the dominant group, I don't think we'll ever become that kind of dominant group.
By design.
But by design, but we can be influential, because it's the people, but it's really beyond the people. It's those eternal values and principles that flow through all of us, and that message will go even if the numbers get smaller.
That makes sense. That's pretty cool. So if, let's say I graduated and I was some sort of well-known advocate for the Tea Party, what would you want me to know about the Tea Party? What would you want somebody who can advocate for you to know about the Tea Party?
We believe, I think it's a freedom movement. Mm-hmm. More freedom and more responsibility, both key. Because you can't have one without the other. You have to have responsibility, and if you are responsible people, then you can assume more freedom. They go really much hand in hand. So our hope is for people to become more responsible and more accountable, so that we can have more freedom and enjoy it. The less responsible and the more I guess out of control and volatile a group of people are, the more there needs to be an outside government control to put a handle on it so that everyone is safe. That's the direction we don't want to go. We want to go in a direction where we need less government restraint and more individual freedom. Right. And so towards that end, we want people to accept and grow a culture of responsibility and freedom. And because it's the United States of America, we can look at our heritage, how we began and why we began, and then take that forward to the 2015 and understand that timeline. We can look at our as a birthright, our history. Yeah. And if we can hearken back to that and then bring it to the present to make it relevant for the people of this generation today, I think that will be a successful mission for our party.
I think you've done wonderful at explaining the overall motivations behind the Tea Party, and it's really informative. I appreciate this. But now we can get into more less generalized and more specific questions, like is limited government important?
It's important for responsible people.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're not responsible, if you have factions, if there are divisions in the country that tend to be violent and out of control and harmful to the general welfare of the people, then that requires a government that is more controlling and more powerful to keep the peace. And that would be the justification for a government to become more oppressive, because the people are not to be trusted. On their own devices, they will harm each other. So for the safety and the good of the nation, we're going to impose a greater police state, right, just to make things safe for everyone, right, because we just can't control it anymore. So I believe that's why the Tea Party message is more important, that if you had a culture that was good and responsible, then there is that memory, and we could point to that in our history and say, this is where we need to go back to. This is the kind of people we need to become. And if we become this kind of people, then the justification for more government control and oppression, it weakens. Yeah. The argument for that weakens. As we become more responsible, we'll be able to vote for people that are more responsible. And we'll be able to go toward that in a nice progression towards a more free society, cool, and away from a more police state society.
That's a very logical roadmap. I like that. When we move to the topic of the economy, do Americans pay too much in taxes?
Yes, yeah, they do.
Where do you think we compare to other developed nations around the world? So.
In terms of taxes?
Yeah.
I think we're one of the highest taxed, and that's an incredible. If you think about this country as being free markets and freedom loving, yeah, to know that we're more oppressive than Russia and China is a stunning development. And how did it happen? And to the point where people who have companies that are proud of being American and want to be in a nation that is stable and not at risk for coups and revolution and corruption and graft, to force those companies with high level of taxes and force them into those countries is unbelievable. And then to be able to characterize those companies that are forced to leave because they have been targeted so badly as in terms of taxes, and to demonize those countries that actually are victims of high taxes, so much so that they have to leave their country, is unbelievable. There is a reason why we have all these companies move out. And it's not the companies, it's that we created such a toxic environment in this country that free markets no longer exist for these countries that were homegrown American companies. So if you want to bring them back, reduce the amount of toxicity to free enterprise, and the companies will come back.
That makes sense. So would we be better off if we looked at the example of like a Bush or Reagan tax structure, and moved more towards that than our current tax structure under Obama?
I think so. I think in 1820 we had a brilliant guy who actually wrote, I think, in the Federalist Papers. His name is Marshall, Chief Justice Marshall. And he said that the power to tax is the power to destroy. So if you want to harm an activity, tax it. Tax the fruits of that activity, and you will decrease the willingness and the motivation to do that activity. So if you're working 40, 50 hours a week, and you want to make that onerous, you tax that person heavily. And if they go into 50 hours a week and they get time and a half, tax it so that when they get their paycheck, it looks just maybe $10 or $15 more than their normal paycheck, except they work 20 hours more than their normal. So it decreases the incentive. So that's why the structure, the ideology that says tax more, is so harmful to a society. It encourages people not to work or to work less, and then it rewards people for not working, especially if you create a welfare state that actually subsidizes people who don't work. It is deadly because it targets the very morality, the very cultural fabric of a society.
That makes sense. I'm going to skip straight on to religion, and I'm going to try to keep questions only where I've been able to find them relating to the Tea Party nationally. Such as on the topic of religion, is there supposed to be a separation between church and state?
The Founding Fathers always believed that the government should not come up with any laws that would infringe on people's faith or violate their conscience. When the word church and state was uttered, it was not in the Constitution. It's never been in the Constitution. For whatever reason, from 1947 on, that phrase was used to create an ideology or an idea that faith should not be involved in the body politic, and that was never been the intention.
So that wasn't the Founding Fathers.
Thomas Jefferson used the word church and state, and it was this group of people in Danbury, Virginia, and they were a sect of Christianity. And they were a smaller sect, and they wrote to Thomas Jefferson asking, what are we going to do? We have this faith, and these other people have this other faith, and our rights may be infringed upon. They may tax us more, they might do something, and I'm concerned. And is there a wall that we can establish between church and state that will protect us?
Yeah.
The Baptist minister, or whatever, he was a minister, he wrote that to Jefferson. And Jefferson, being a good communicator, used the word church and state, and sent it back and says the wall of church and state will not be violated. And the meaning of that was that the government could never, ever, ever come up with laws that would infringe or force people to violate their conscience. That's a restraint on the government.
Okay.
Now, people, they were encouraged to pray in school. They're encouraged to pray before they opened up a political meeting, like a city council, which they still do, or in Congress, have a prayer. They have statues of celebrating Judeo-Christian ideals because of our Founding Fathers based a lot of the freedoms based on what they found in the Bible. So that's where that came from. Okay. But it became twisted after 1947. started to change. But yeah, that's where it needs to be contained, is the government cannot infringe on your faith.
So then should the government be able to prevent gay people from marrying then, like using religion as a reason?
Well, here's a more libertarian answer, because it's going to be, in the Tea Party, it's going to be a wide divide.
Yeah.
You have libertarians who don't address faith at all.
Right.
It's completely divorced. And then you have people who believe that faith and a virtuous society is important for a republic, for it to continue as a republic. So as far as government didn't help you when you got married.
Right. When
you got married, you're not, 20 years from now, you're not going to think of, wow, this is wonderful. I just remember that government bureaucrat like it was yesterday. Where's his picture? You don't do that, because they don't have a place in marriage. And they never did have a place in marriage up until 1800. And then they came up with all these licenses and stuff.
Right.
But government should not have a role in that, because if you do, then they get to a point where they're redefining marriage, and they get to a point where they're putting pastors in jail because they're not going to perform a service that is in violation of their conscience. Mm-hmm. You can't have that. That's a violation of their First Amendment rights. We do have a First Amendment right and freedom of religion. There, with that ruling, with the gay marriage thing, now not only have they redefined marriage, but they put all the churches at risk. And that's never been, that never was the intention.
Are the churches at risk of being forced under law to marry gay people?
Yes.
Okay. Well, then I see where the concern is.
There is a concern. There's a charge against, and it's already happened in Canada, but there is some kind of, I can't remember, it's in Colorado or someplace in the Midwest that issue is raised at its head.
Oh, was it Colorado where the county clerk refused to issue gay marriage licenses?
Kentucky.
Kentucky.
Yeah, Kentucky. Yeah.
So in that position, is she exercising her religious freedom by not issuing marriage licenses to other people who want to get married?
I believe she is, and her faith dictates that. Because she's being forced to involve herself in a process intimately by signing her name on it and approving it, mm-hmm. in violation to her morality and her faith. She can't be forced to do that.
Okay. She
cannot. And here's the other thing. The premise of this is all wrong. The Supreme Court had no jurisdiction in addressing and redefining marriage. They had no jurisdiction to do that. Mm-hmm. When they did that, we talk about the higher law above the king. Well, there's a higher law above a group of 9 lawyers. Mm-hmm. They invalidated their position because they went outside their jurisdiction. So they acted unlawfully, because within the law they can only act on things that relate directly to the Constitution and interpreting it. Okay. They wrote law on this, which is the role of Congress, our representatives. So if we don't like what a certain congressman did in participating in writing a law that we find offensive, we can vote them out. But if 9 judges do it, we have no recourse. That's why the separation of powers is such a key. Mm. So now the Supreme Court is violating that separation of powers, creating a constitutional crisis by creating law. And they can't, by law, create law. So that's why it was perfectly fine for her to go ahead and do that. In fact, she's duty bound to honor her conscience, especially if a law is imposed that's unlawfully imposed.
And looking at it as from a more personal point of view, like myself, I got married, happiest day of my life. It was wonderful. Marriage has been bliss. It's been so great. I personally cannot see an influence on gay people getting married having anything to do with how happy my marriage is. Is there, like when I talked to the chairman of the Republican Party, Hampton, he said that it redefined marriage for me when gay people got married. And I'd be curious what your position on that would be. What you would think, does other people, gay people getting married, affect heterosexual marriage at all?
Well, it's always, like this country began, always a higher law, natural law. And so them getting married, like I said, the government shouldn't be involved in it in the first place.
But so, we're not talking about government.
Yeah, so no, it wouldn't affect me at all. And they could have, like almost any other group of people, have civil laws, civil marriages. That's fine. Religious marriage is quite a different thing, and if you have a government imposing that, it's different. But no government can redefine marriage for me. Gotcha. They can't redefine life or death for me, and they can't redefine compassion and what's charity for me. So no, a group of bureaucrats can't do it. Now, if that ever happens, it'll affect me because other people, there'll be a culture that will derive what the meaning of charity or love is from a government official. That'll affect me, yes, because of culture. But inside myself, and hopefully my group of friends and family, will retain the idea that our sense of charity and our sense of love and marriage comes not from a bureaucrat, but from a higher source.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
Just a couple religious questions. I've heard from like Glenn Beck, Rush Limbaugh, and well, some talking heads and Facebook a lot, doubting the president's claims that he's Christian. I've heard a lot of people saying that he's Muslim. What do you believe?
I can't see inside his soul. So, and I would never, ever even pretend to do that. I would never pretend to do that. But we can judge a person by the fruits of their labor. So if there's a person who spent all their lives helping people who are less fortunate and loving them with all their soul and mind and doing it selflessly, then they say that they're Christian. Well, I don't know if that person's really a Christian, but I could look at the fruits of their labor and say, you know what? He probably is. And if he says he is, and that this is the fruits of their labor, then... Okay. But I go with the fruits of their labor. Now, if they say that they're a Christian and they do all kinds of abominations, then I would say, well, it doesn't really matter whether they're Christian or not. He says he's a Christian, but the kind of suffering and pain that's being inflicted on all these people suggests that regardless of what he says he is, he's doing some really bad things to these people. So you look at the fruits of their labor and you address that and try to reverse the damage. If the fruits are filled with pain and suffering, then you try to stop the pain and suffering and reverse it. So you don't go into what's in that person's heart and what they say. You don't even go into that discussion with them.
Well then, okay. Can we say that, like, let's use founding fathers, for instance, said they were Christian, did a lot of good things, and we take it at face value that they weren't, you know, Jewish or Muslim, still doing good things. Is it safe to assume that, say, your favorite founding father is Christian?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Let's just skip right on into to gun control, because that was in the news today. We had our governor signed some BS into law, and in a broader sense, does gun control help prevent mass shootings? Because that seems to be the argument, that gun control would result in gun control in the realm of background checks and like gun purchasing preventions, like restrictions on, you know, extended clips and whatnot. Would stuff like that prevent mass shootings?
No.
No.
In fact, it would create the conditions by which mass shootings would occur.
Right.
It's the irony that the people who look to create conditions that make it difficult for law-abiding citizens to obtain a firearm and then responsibly learn how to use it by people who are trained. Those people have the nerve to say, when the mass shootings occur, that the people who are responsible for the mass shootings. That's bizarre, because it is these people, if we look at example after example after example, from the person in Colorado going to a movie house, how many, that he was going out there to kill lots of people.
That was his goal.
He wants, now if that's your mission, you want to be comfortable doing it. You don't want somebody, a responsible person who has a gun, that'll stop you before you kill more than 2 people. So he went past 6 movie theaters, and until he found a friendly newspaper, not a newspaper, a movie theater, that had a sign saying gun-free zone, which told the mass murderer, oh, I can go there, I can empty my clip, put in another clip, and continue shooting because it's a gun-free zone. And then I have to hope that the people in the theater are all law-abiding citizens, which means none of them will have a gun. And I can just kill with impunity.
Right.
Gun-free zones, that's what certain people call them, but other people call them kill zones.
Okay.
They're disarmed. Now, I would ask the people who support gun-free zones to make this world safer, why don't you ask the president to make sure that his security detail have no guns? And then he's going to be even safer because his security detail will be disarmed.
Yeah.
And see how much safer he feels.
I think the counter argument with that to be like, for instance, I'm not the president. There probably aren't as many people gunning for me around the world as the president would have.
Yes.
But use the Colorado shooting as a good example, and there's other ones. The most recent one and the one before that. Did these guys lawfully under the law? They were lawful citizens when they bought their guns, when they obtained their guns, weren't they?
Yeah,
They're following the gun laws. So the argument would be: is it if he had, an old-timey musket, or if something less lethal than something that's a semi-automatic with an extended clip, would that have cut down on the amount of people who died?
Oh yeah, I would think it would be more effort. And if there were no guns, he would use a knife.
Right. And
there'd be more people. He would just have to work harder. He'll burn calories, but he'll have to burn. He'll have to kill, in a very nasty way.
It would take a while.
But here's the thing. It's not just the mass murderers and the jihadists that we have to worry about, because we've got jihadists coming in. We have people who are well off, can have bodyguards. So these same people, a lot of them in Hollywood, who scream for disarming law-abiding citizens, have an army of people around them. Kind of hypocritical. And while they maybe have more people gunning for them, the fact is that each and every one of us could be victims of a crime close to home, and we have no means to defend ourselves. We can't hire a bodyguard. So
that's a good point.
Here's the thing. More freedom or less freedom? If you want more freedom, you have to be more responsible. So taking away guns is more government oppression.
That's right.
Disarming the citizens, making us more vulnerable to attacks. And that's exactly what's going to happen. Israel, Netanyahu came out and spoke just yesterday. They had all kinds of attacks by these Palestinian terrorists. They were knife attacks. What was the response? Well, a sane person says, okay, I'm going to implement a program that allows more Israeli citizens, not less, more Israeli citizens to obtain a firearm and get trained properly so that when we are attacked, your family is not at the mercy of someone that has no mercy for you, that hates you. So that's the program they initiated yesterday. Now they already have, almost everybody is armed.
Right.
That's why there's not a lot of mass murders in Israel. So now they're teaching them, and that makes them safer because they're more responsible. Then in this country,
Would you
we have to do
suppose
this.
it'd be the same on the other side of the fence with in Palestine? I mean,
Hmm?
like there's a lot of armed people right on the other side of the border. There's also a lot of killings right on the other side of the border.
Yeah, it's a violent culture.
It is. So the Black Lives Matter movement, not a lot of bodyguards, not a lot of people with bodyguards in that movement, but gun control is one of the things that they're pushing on. So can we kind of understand where they might be coming from? Being that it's a lot of people in the inner city, a lot of crime, they see, okay, well, maybe fewer guns in certain areas would result in less gun crime. Can we kind of understand where they might be coming from?
Well, the Black Lives Matter movement, I see them as a very negative movement.
Yeah.
They're very, they embrace criminals, and they attack law enforcement. Law enforcement is our last line of defense before we have very powerful groups of people fighting against each other. The law and law enforcement protects that in that sense. It keeps everyone, to the point where it doesn't bubble over into mass anarchy. They're attacking that now.
Yeah.
They're threatening police officers. So I have their agenda suspect. If you embrace criminals and you embrace criminal culture based on skin color, I have an issue with you.
Right.
And I also have an issue over the fact that you want to disarm people who are responsible and law-abiding. The people who are responsible and law-abiding are the ones that groups of criminals target.
Right.
So I see a connection there. The less people that are armed, the more successful criminals will be in committing crimes. And if you have a group that is a criminal advocacy group, who may be a criminal advocacy group, what better thing than to make sure that greater numbers of law-abiding citizens disarm themselves so that the criminal activity can prosper and grow.
Can flourish. Yeah. Moving off of guns, is global warming a hoax?
Yes.
Yes.
And that's from them. And that's from their own people. The United Nations, who is big on this, and they're big into this global order thing, controlling them. Once again, we're not responsible, so let's get a control that's a global thing. Two people from England, two top scientists, were using their statistics. A few years ago, we got their emails. Someone hacked into it, and it showed the communication. They said, you know what, we are altering the stats, we're altering the statistics. They're talking about how we can keep this going and not having it discovered. It was blown out of the water. And this was, I think, maybe a decade ago. And they're still coming up with it. The numbers are still false. Just last week, we had the president of the Sierra Club talking about it. Once again, they said the science is finished and the science is over. The argument, well, by definition,
Science is never ended.
It's never ended.
Constantly tested throughout time.
Yeah, the thing about sugar. Oh, you gotta stop eating sugar. You gotta use
How many different laws have we had, or things have we heard about sugar?
Yeah, so it's always, you're always testing it by nature. Unless it's a religion or faith, then you may not question it. But they're coming in and said the science is over. Well, it isn't over. There's an objective measure. If I give you a thermometer, and for 15 years, it shows that you have normal temperatures, 98.7, whatever it is. Right. And every year, every day of every year, I do this, right? And somebody else that's sitting over there says, no, that temperature, his temperature is going off the charts. And within 2 years, his skin is going to melt, his fingers are going to melt. We got to stop it now. We got to destroy free markets, and we got to tax everybody.
Right.
We got to stop people driving these cars and everything. But every year for 15 years, you're normal. And then they come up to Congress and says, well, it's global warming, that the science is done. And then somebody says, well, wait a minute, we got we got a chart here. I mean,
So do
you
you,
believe in thermometers, and do you have a problem with? No. Is it an objective measurement of temperature? Yes. Okay. Well, for 15 years, it showed there's not even a fraction of increase. Well, our scientists said, no, wait. We measured it. Your scientists are basing their information on measurements like this. This is coming from the United States government, using satellites that measure, state-of-the-art, measuring the temperature of the Earth. Like NASA. What do you have to say? Well, they never answer that, because the figures show that not even a fraction of a degree has increased over the past 15 years, during which time parts of Florida, parts of Virginia, parts of New York, and Boston would be underwater right now. All of this would have been done 8 or 9 years ago, according to Al Gore. So none of this stuff is accurate. So you have to wonder to yourself, what is the hidden agenda? Because what we've been talking about is everything that they're proposing destroys free enterprise and redistributes wealth from the earners to some other place.
So is it the UN's hidden agenda to destroy free enterprise, or at least weaken it?
Yeah, I believe that that most of the countries in the United Nations are despots, dictatorships, forms of communist and socialist governments. Very few are free nations. A very small minority.
Right.
And within that, there's an even smaller minority that ever experienced actual free markets. Even in the United States at this point is not. So their concept about freedom and about government control is different than how our country was formed. So yeah, so I don't believe that, I believe that what they understand and what they believe is good for humanity is any construct that has to do with submission of a population and the control of a population, and that will make them happy, and that will allow the governments to operate more smoothly. That's what their mindset is.
That makes sense then. I'm going to blow through the rest of these. In 2012, the Republican legislature, the state, with the support of Ken Cuccinelli, who I liked, and the Tea Party, passed a bill through the House anyway, that would have required medically unnecessary transvaginal ultrasound before getting an abortion, and made huge news. I mean, on the BBC, even, talking about how the Americans were trying to do a medically unnecessary transvaginal ultrasound to prevent people from getting abortions, or to at least deter them from it. Our governor at the time ended up siding with the Democrats and killing the bill after it passed the House. It was a deal in Virginia, so I'm curious if any of our Hampton Roads groups were involved with the that particular bill, or was it more of a Richmond thing? Here's Ken Cuccinelli's baby.
Yeah, the Tea Party was never officially involved with that.
Gotcha.
It's all more, yeah, it was more individual. Like, for instance, I would support that.
Yeah.
I would loud and clear, because it's interesting that these people who aren't worried about all these unnecessary, medical procedures and examinations have a problem with this particular one.
Yeah.
More information about what you're doing to your life and to the life of the unborn baby should be something that we should all embrace. A scientist, if you're a scientist or a rational person, if you're going to do anything to your body or to the body of someone else, you want to know exactly what it looks like. More information, not less information.
Yeah. As I recall, there was a pamphlet they were supposed to read to the person while they were having the transvaginal ultrasound that was describing the baby's right to life, and that didn't even make it out of the house, though. Moving on, should we be concerned? Well, Donald Trump said what really put Trump on the map of the electoral fights was when he said that Mexico was sending rapists and murderers over the border. And people took that a lot of different ways. But do you believe that, what do you make of his comments? I'll just leave it at that.
They're accurate.
Yeah.
Accurate. Dictatorships are dictatorships because they dictate, and they want to make their work and their life as a controller easier. So in 1980, in the country that I lived in before I came here, called Cuba, Fidel Castro, in his infinite wisdom, unloaded the eastern states of every single insane asylum across from Santiago all the way to Guantanamo, and just released all the nastiest criminals. He's feeding them. He doesn't want them. They're anarchists, they're crazy people, they're murderers, and he sent them in a flotilla to Florida.
Right.
But that is not something that is unusual. All these despots want to get rid of their troublemakers. So Mexico does the same thing. Now, it's not a government program. In Cuba, it was an official policy. But in Mexico, they just come over. The drug cartels and the gangs, the human traffickers of flesh, they come over. If we don't have a border to protect, then we are susceptible to all kinds of terrible things coming across.
Would you assume that that those first generation just came across the border immigrants from Mexico would commit more crimes after crossing the border than, say, families who have lived here forever legally?
Yeah, I believe that, because some of them, just like Donald Trump says, rapists and murderers coming up, some of them are rapists and murderers, yes. Some of them are actually illegal immigrants. Some of them, but not all of them. Some of them are jihadists. Some of them are part of MS-13 and other really bad gangs.
Right.
Some of them are drug traffickers, and some of them are sociopaths. So among all of them, how you would describe all of them, including the illegal immigrants, are illegal aliens. And that's what they all are. They have that one thing in common. And the first thing that you do, even if you're a kind-hearted person, if the first thing you do when you interrupt someone's home is to break in, then you've already begun your life in that nation as a criminal.
You're right. You're right off to a bad start. And here I have some questions that I put on here just because I was having trouble finding an answer for them. People talk about this type of stuff in school, especially amongst my generation. But should government be able to force businesses to serve discriminated groups that the business doesn't want to serve? Like, say there's a religious objection or something. Not even discussing marriage, but should the government be able to force business to serve anybody, where if a business doesn't want to serve that particular discriminated group?
It's the road of good intentions.
Yeah.
So if you're a government in a free country, right, and you want to figure out how in the world can I impose more and more controls over these people and teach them that submitting to government control is a good thing. Well, okay, let's go ahead and say, let's try to take control of the business sector by telling them just what they should do and who they should hire and how much they should pay for people when they hire people. And then from there we can leapfrog incrementally and take over more and more control.
Is that a slippery slope?
That's the slippery slope. I'd say that the government has no say-so. That's not a role of a government bureaucrat. In fact, the things that they have done, and they will always phrase it in the terms of protecting somebody or some group or some nation, is always bad. Yeah, it's bad. Let the free markets determine that, like it always has. If a business is doing and is practicing a business that you don't like, then you stop going to that business, and it'll be the most. It will be the most.
Hit the bottom dollar.
Yes, it will be the most democratic process, because the business is very much a democratic process. Exactly. In terms of, if I'm serving you very well, you will tell other people that I serve you. Yes, and I do it, not only serve it, but I serve it with a good heart, charitable heart, and I'll enjoy it. And you can see it in my face, and you will bring people in. And the reward for that, the blessing, would be having
That
you
makes
give
sense.
me money for the service I provide, and that's a good thing. If I do something that's repugnant, you will tell other people, and soon, very soon, I will go out of business. I don't need a government bureaucrat or a judge to tell me how to run the business. So that's why I support a more libertarian view on that.
Is there anything wrong with the Black Lives Matter movement, particularly the chant, Black Lives Matter?
It's racist.
Yes.
It's a Ku Klux Klan. It's worse than the Ku Klux Klan because parties, the Democrat Party, is embracing that. It should be offensive to every American, even black Americans. It should be all lives, all human lives matter. And I would say all life, all earth life matters.
Right. And I've heard that
Everything
argument
matters.
a lot, the counter-argument to Black Lives Matter being all lives matter.
All
And
lives
I brought that up at school thinking I wasn't saying anything controversial. Yeah, lives matter, big deal. And what was explained to me was that the phrase wasn't Black Lives Matter and white lives don't. It actually meant black lives in the term of, in the very specific realm of persecution under the law and the likelihood of black people being shot, as opposed to white people and the ratio of unarmed white people being shot and the ratio of black unarmed people being shot by cops, and how that was slightly out of whack. And that's basically what the chant meant, but that's a lot longer than 3 words. It makes for a really crappy chant.
Yeah, but whatever they dress it up, it's like, let's say there's a group of people that goes to the oven and put their hands on it. And they're deliberate and they're arrogant because they believe that they should be able to show their power to the world, and they put their hand on the stove and they get burned and they get mad, and other people who have more common sense don't.
Right.
And then they say, you know what? More of our group of people get our hands burnt, and so we believe that oven is discriminatory because these other groups of people don't get burnt. Well, maybe the problem is not the stove. Maybe it's the problems in your culture.
Right.
Maybe you shouldn't embrace such a self-destructive or arrogant culture that demands that the laws of society doesn't apply to you, or the laws of physics. Maybe that's a place you should look at.
That makes sense. That makes sense. I'm going to have to use that analogy because, as I said, these are the questions that I personally had trouble when someone hit me with something. I was like, double me, don't really know what to say. And I just need to, I would like to actually have something to say like that when stuff comes up.
Just allow the common sense to just bubble up and just fly off your tongue.
That's